There's a specific kind of frustration that comes from watching a masterpiece go to waste. When you first step into the world of Crimson Desert, the technical wizardry is undeniable. Every NPC feels grounded with high fidelity motion capture. The physics-based puzzles actually require you to engage with the environment rather than just pressing a contextual action button. And the combat is a visceral, high-octane culmination of modern action mechanics. On paper, it is a triumph of engineering. But as the hours tick by, a hollow realization sets in. You're exploring a world-class engine that lacks a reason to exist. It's a mechanical mirage. The developers have built a stunning high-definition sandbox where every grain of sand is simulated to perfection, yet there is no one to play with and no story to drive that shovel. Without a narrative backbone to tie these systems together, the game begins to feel less like a cohesive piece of art and more like a $70 tech demo. It provides the how of gameplay with the industry-leading precision, but it completely ignores the why. In an era where slop is often defined by lazy mechanics, Crimson Desert presents a more refined tragedy, a game that is mechanically brilliant but fundamentally lonely. The inevitable comparison here is Final Fantasy XVI. Both games share a very specific DNA. They are the products of veteran MMO studios attempting to pivot into the prestige single-player space. Because of this, they both suffer from the MMO quest hangover, the endless fetch tasks, the busy work puzzles, and the kill X amount of creatures, padding that feels antiquated in a modern AAA narrative experience. However, Final Fantasy XVI had a saving grace that Crimson Desert lacks: narrative gravity. Even when Final Fantasy XVI forced you into a tedious questline to help a villager you didn't care about, it was anchored by a massive, high-stakes story that pulled you through the mud. You endured the MMO-ass quest design because you were invested in the themes, the characters, and the world-ending stakes. Crimson Desert keeps the tedious quest structure, but discards the emotional payoff. It is Final Fantasy XVI-ass gameplay without the narrative heartbeat that made the game's flaws forgivable. When you remove the story from an MMO framework, you aren't left with a streamlined action game, you're just left with the chores. The gaming landscape has shifted. The make your own fun excuse, unfortunately, only works if there are other people around to witness it. Historically, the most successful sandbox games, Garry's Mod, Minecraft, Valheim, No Man's Sky, have maintained a massive cultural relevance because they are social playgrounds. The fun is emergent because it is shared. When you take that sandbox architecture and shift it to strictly single-player experience without a robust narrative, it creates a fundamental identity crisis. Multiplayer games that attempt this transition rarely succeed because the human element is the story. The only notable counterpoint is a game like Kenshi, but that works because the story is mechanical. The player starts as a nobody and must survive a hostile world. In Crimson Desert, you aren't struggling for survival in a meaningful way. You're just completing checklists in a beautiful, curated open world. Taking an MMO engine and stripping out the players while failing to replace them with a script just doesn't cut it for me. There's an old industry trick that usually goes unnoticed until it's too late. The late stage lockdown. The sudden, last-minute addition to Denuvo in Crimson Desert isn't just a standard anti-piracy measure. In this context, it feels like a smoking gun. When the developer knows they have a mechanical masterpiece that lacks a narrative soul. They know exactly how the public will react once the initial 30-second clips stop being enough. The logic is cynical but effective. If the players could try before they buy via piracy, they would likely realize within the first 2 hours that the story is a whole lot of nothing. They would see the fetch quests and the busy work puzzles for what they are and drop the game before spending a dime. By forcing you to purchase through DRM, the developers are betting on a psychological trap. If you already spent $70, you are far more likely to just stick with it simply because the combat feels so good. It's a strategy designed to protect the hype cycle. The marketing built an expectation of a single-player epic to match the fidelity of the world, but the reality is a lonely sandbox. Denuvo ensures that by the time you realize the narrative masterpiece you were promised doesn't exist, your refund window has likely already slammed shut. At the end of the day, the argument isn't just about gameplay loops or DRM, it's about what we believe video games should be. There is a segment of the audience that will tell you story doesn't matter as long as the gameplay is a 10 out of 10. They say if the graphics are realistic and the NPCs are motion captured, the game has done its job. But that perspective treats games like toys rather than art. Games should mean something. They should have themes, messages, and a why that justifies the how. Writing is the connective tissue that turns a series of button presses into a meaningful experience. Crimson Desert offers us an incredible amount of stuff to do, physics to manipulate, movement to master, and enemies to dismantle, but it offers almost no reason to care about any of it. When you are given the option to fast forward through a story because it's a whole lot of nothing, you aren't just skipping dialogue. You're witnessing the failure of the game to justify its own existence as a piece of art. High fidelity slop is still slop, no matter how many motion captured NPCs you throw at it. If we want games to be respected as a serious medium, we have to demand more than just a polished game engine. We need a backbone. Without the story, the novelty of DLSS reconstructed grains of sand wears off. Crimson Desert is an antiquated concept dressed up in next-gen clothing. It tries to take the structure of an MMO, strip away the social heart that makes that structure work, and fails to replace it with a narrative depth required for a solo experience. It is a testament to the technical achievement and a warning of creative bankruptcy. It is the most MMO single-player game ever made, and unfortunately, that is not a compliment.